My wife cheated on me with her boss, then convinced me to sign over our $300, $0 house and a $150, $0 inheritance, only to sue me for emotional damages. I found out she was planning to run away with the money all along. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get like this, but here I am. My wife, Lisa, was always the bubbly, slightly bitchy girl who loved to act like she had everything under control. She was charming, sharp-tongued, and honestly a bit manipulative. At least that's how I saw her when we first got together. We'd been married for 8 years, and for most of that time things seemed fine. Or so I thought. It started subtly, the little signs that something was off. She'd be more secretive about her phone, always sneaking off to the bathroom to take calls, or she'd get unreasonably defensive if I asked who she was talking to. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she was just stressed from work or dealing with the usual bullshit life throws at you. But then I started noticing her texts, the late nights she claimed were work dinners, and how she'd suddenly become colder, more dismissive. Still, I trusted her, at least I wanted to. The real shocker came one night when I came home early from work. I'd been feeling a little off that day, so I decided to surprise her. I walked into the house expecting to find her cooking dinner or watching TV, but instead I found her in our bedroom, half-dressed, tangled up with her boss, Mark. They didn't notice me at first. She was kissing him, her hands all over him. I saw enough to realize this wasn't just a friendly work thing. It was something much more intimate. My stomach dropped. My mind went blank for a second, then everything exploded inside me. I felt this wave of rage, betrayal, and heartbreak all at once. I couldn't believe she'd do this to me, especially with her boss of all people. Mark, by the way, was a slimeball, always trying to butter her up at work, acting like he was some kind of big shot. And Lisa. She was always bitching about how she hated her job, but I guess she loved the attention Mark gave her. I froze, trying to process what I was seeing, but she looked up and saw me. Her face twisted into this fake smile like she was trying to pretend everything was fine. "Oh, you're home early," she said, acting innocent. I just stared at her, speechless. I couldn't even get words out at first. The betrayal felt like it was physically ripping me apart. I could feel my blood boil, but I somehow managed to ask her what was going on. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked right into my eyes and lied through her teeth. Said it was just a harmless flirt. That Mark was just a friend, that I was overreacting. She even had the nerve to tell me I was paranoid, that I didn't trust her. I wanted to scream at her, tell her I saw everything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just turned around and left the house, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. That night was a blur. I couldn't sleep, kept replaying what I saw, trying to convince myself maybe I was mistaken. But deep down, I knew I was. Lisa had been lying to me for months. She'd been sneaking around, having sex with her boss, probably planning to leave me or use that money somehow. And the worst part, she convinced me to sign over our house, a $300, $0 place, and she'd even manipulated me into giving her my inheritance, which was about $150, $0. All that money just so she could run away with Mark and start a new life. I started feeling sick just thinking about how she'd played me. She'd been so bitchy and clever, convincing me she loved me, that she was loyal, while behind my back she was scheming to get rid of me. I felt so stupid, so betrayed. But I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let her get away with this. Not without a fight. That's when I started planning my revenge, even if I didn't quite realize it yet. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and I found myself obsessively going over every detail, trying to piece together how I'd been so blind. The worst part was feeling like I'd been played, like I was some fool who trusted the wrong person. I didn't want to believe that Lisa, the woman I married, had been lying to me. For months, maybe even longer. And I definitely didn't want to believe she was capable of planning to screw me over for her own benefit. The next morning, I started digging. I knew I had to find proof, something concrete that would make her realize I wasn't going to be pushed around or taken for a fool. I checked her phone, her emails, her social media, anything I could get my hands on. At first, I just wanted to see if I was imagining things, if maybe she'd just been having a rough patch. But I found texts, explicit, flirtatious messages between her and Mark. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just talking about work. They were talking about meeting up, about sneaking around, about how much they both wanted to get away from their lives and start fresh together. I also found bank statements that showed her withdrawing money from our joint account. Not just small amounts either. Large sums to pay for hotels, flights, even cash withdrawals at places I didn't recognize. Every step she took was premeditated. She was planning her escape, and I was just the fool who'd been feeding her her lifestyle while she was plotting. Her future with Mark. I couldn't believe I'd been so. For years, I'd been working my ass off to make sure we had a good life, and she was out there planning her betrayal. She convinced me to sign over our house, our biggest investment, so she could run away with Mark and live the high life. She told me she needed the money to start fresh, that she was done with the marriage, and I bought every word. I was so desperate to hold on to her, to keep our family intact. I didn't see how she was slowly, methodically destroying everything. The moment I uncovered all this, I knew I had to confront her again. I waited until she came home from work, trying to keep my anger in check. When she walked in, I was already sitting on the couch, my fists clenched. She looked surprised, maybe even a little guilty, though she tried to hide it with that bitchy smirk she always wore. I told her I knew everything, showed her the texts, the bank statements, everything I had found. Her face paled for a second, then she started lying again. "Oh, that's nothing," she said, brushing it off. "Mark and I are just friends. You're overreacting. You always jump to conclusions." But I wasn't buying it anymore. I told her I knew she was planning to run away with her boss, that she'd been lying to me for months, and I was sick of her bullshit. I could see her panic setting in, her eyes darting around like she was trying to come up with a new excuse. But I was done listening to her lies. I told her I wanted her out of the house, that I wasn't going to be played anymore. Her reaction was classic Lisa, defensive, bitchy, and full of blame shifting. She started crying, saying I was crazy, that I was ruining her life, that she loved me but was just trying to find herself. She even accused me of being controlling, insecure, and jealous. That was her favorite line when she was caught, blame me for her mistakes, but I knew better. I saw through her act. She was a manipulative bitch trying to save her own ass. That confrontation was the turning point. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and pure disgust. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind for so long, but I also knew I had to do something about it. I couldn't let her walk away with everything, our house, my inheritance, and maybe even more. I was going to fight for what was mine, even if I had to go to war to get it back. I started thinking about my next move, about how I was going to expose her, and about how she'd regret ever crossing me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew I had to act fast before she managed to disappear with all the money and leave me with nothing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she'd been planning this for a while. She convinced me to sign over the house, knowing she'd leave me high and dry. She used my trust and love against me. I felt so stupid, so betrayed, but I also felt a fire inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Revenge, I guess, but not just that. I wanted justice. I wanted her to pay for what she'd done, and I was going to make sure she did. After I confronted Lisa and laid everything out on the table, I knew I couldn't just let her walk away with my house and my inheritance without fighting back. My mind was racing. What could I do? How could I turn this around? I didn't want her to think she'd played me for a fool and just took everything. No, I had to be smarter. I had to plan carefully. First thing I did was get a lawyer. I didn't trust her anymore, and I certainly didn't want her sneaking off with the money or twisting things to her advantage. I found a guy who specialized in family law, someone who understood how to handle cases involving betrayal, property, and assets. I gave him all the evidence I had, texts, bank statements, everything I'd uncovered. The lawyer told me I had a solid case to challenge her claims, especially since she was trying to sue me for emotional damages after everything she'd done. That kind of thing was a common tactic for manipulative spouses trying to squeeze more money out of an ex. While I waited for legal advice, I started digging into the house papers and the inheritance documentation. I realized she'd convinced me to sign over the house under false pretenses. She told me she wanted to fix things, that she'd been feeling trapped and needed a fresh start. but I had a suspicion she'd been planning to sell the house or use it as leverage to get more money. And the inheritance. She'd lied to me about her intentions, claiming she'd keep it safe, but I found out she'd already transferred some of it into her own account. She'd been planning her escape from day one. I also discovered she'd been secretly talking to a lawyer behind my back. Turns out she'd hired someone to help her set up a legal claim for emotional damages, which she thought would pressure me into caving. I was furious when I found out. She'd been manipulating the entire situation, making me out to be the bad guy while she plotted her getaway. I felt like I'd been played for a fool, but I also realized I had a lot of leverage if I played my cards right. One night, I sat her down again. She was still acting bitchy, trying to act innocent, but I wasn't having it. I told her I knew her game, that I had all the proof, and that I was prepared to fight her in court. I warned her that I'd contest her claims for emotional damages, especially since I'd just uncovered her lies about the house and inheritance. I told her I was going to take back what was mine, our house, my inheritance, and that I wouldn't let her get away with screwing me over. Her reaction was classic Lisa. She started crying, saying I was ruining everything, that she loved me, that she was just trying to save herself after years of feeling trapped. She begged me to forgive her, to let her go so we could work things out. But I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. I saw her for what she was, a manipulative, selfish bitch who'd been planning her escape for months. I told her she was done, that I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I was going to fight for my rights and get everything back. That's when I started drafting a plan. I knew I had to act fast before she managed to sell the house or transfer more money. I contacted a forensic accountant to help me trace the money she'd taken, every withdrawal, every transfer, and I hired a private investigator to look into her dealings. I wanted to catch her red-handed trying to run away with the rest of the inheritance or sell the house without my consent. Meanwhile, I also kept the pressure on her legally. I filed a motion to freeze the house's title and any accounts she controlled. I made it clear I wasn't going to let her just take what she wanted and run. The more I looked into her plans, the angrier I got. She'd been lying to me, manipulating me, and trying to steal my future. I realized I had to be relentless if I wanted to stop her. The thing was, I wasn't just fighting for the house or the money. I was fighting for my dignity. For years, I'd been the loyal husband, working hard, trusting her. And now I saw her for what she truly was, a selfish, bitchy woman who'd do anything to get what she wanted, even if it meant destroying me. I knew I had to stand my ground and fight back with everything I had. Because if I didn't, she'd walk away with everything, leaving me with nothing but heartbreak and betrayal. And I wasn't going to let that happen. By this point, I was fully committed to fighting back. I didn't want her to think she could just manipulate her way out of this. I knew she'd been planning her escape for months, maybe even longer. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that she'd been orchestrating her exit, using my trust and love against me. I felt a mix of rage and determination, rage at her betrayal, and determination to get what was rightfully mine. I started gathering everything I could to build my case. The bank statements, the texts, the fake lawyer she'd hired, everything was evidence. I also remembered some things she'd said in passing, little comments that now made sense, like how she'd always been sick of this marriage, or how she'd never really loved me. That was the truth she'd been hiding behind her bitchy attitude. One crucial move I made was hiring a forensic accountant. I needed to trace every cent she'd taken from the accounts, especially the large withdrawals. I wanted to know exactly how much she'd stolen, how much was still accessible, and whether she'd transferred funds into her own accounts or even abroad. The accountant worked quickly, pulling up detailed reports that showed her draining our joint account over the past few months, funneling money into various accounts I'd never heard of. I felt sick seeing it all laid out in black and white. Meanwhile, I also hired a private investigator. I couldn't trust her to be honest anymore. I needed eyes on her at all times. The Pi found out she was meeting with her lawyer, who I later discovered was a friend of hers she'd secretly hired to help her set up a legal claim for emotional damages. It was all part of her plan to squeeze more money out of me, to make me think I was the bad guy. That's when I knew I had to get ahead of her, to challenge her claims legally. I initiated the legal process by filing a motion to freeze the house's title and any of her bank accounts that were in her name. I also demanded an accounting of all the money she'd taken. When she found out I was doing this, she flipped. She started accusing me of trying to ruin her, crying and screaming that I was breaking up. The family. She even had the nerve to call me paranoid and insecure, trying to paint herself as the victim, but I saw through her act. I knew she was just trying to buy time to hide her tracks. One night I sat her down again, more calm but firm. I told her I knew everything about her affair, her plans, her lies. I told her I was going to take back the house, the inheritance, everything she'd tried to steal. I warned her that if she didn't come clean and return what she'd taken, I'd go to court and fight her for every penny. Her bitchy smirk faded for a moment, replaced by a look of genuine panic. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She tried to deny everything, again claiming she loved me, that she was just confused, that Mark was just a mistake. But I didn't buy any of it. I told her I had proof, texts, bank statements, witness statements from the pie, that I'd fight her in court if I had to. The last thing I wanted was a messy legal battle, but I was ready for it. I'd be damned if I let her walk away with my house, my inheritance, and my dignity. In the days that followed, I kept pushing forward. I filed all the necessary paperwork, coordinated with my lawyer, and made sure every piece of evidence was in order. I also prepared myself emotionally. I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about standing up to her, about making her realize that she couldn't manipulate her way out of what she'd done. I felt betrayed, angry, and hurt, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I had to be strong for myself, for my future. Looking back now, I realize I was in a war, not just legal but personal. Lisa had lied, cheated, manipulated, and tried to ruin me financially, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had my lawyer, my evidence, and a plan. I was going to fight for what was mine and make her pay for what she'd done. Because at the end of the day, you learn who your real enemies are, and sometimes that enemy is the person you once loved most in the world. The legal battle started to heat up quickly after I filed my motions. I felt like I was in a war, every step carefully calculated, every piece of evidence weaponized against her. Lisa, of course, doubled down on her bitchy attitude, trying to spin everything in her favor. She hired her own lawyer, a slick guy who kept trying to dismiss my claims as baseless, claiming she had the right to seek emotional damages because I supposedly abused her emotionally. That was laughable, considering I just caught her red-handed planning her escape. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. I had all the proof I needed, and I knew her game. I also had the forensic accountant digging through her accounts, uncovering more money she'd hidden or transferred abroad. I found out she'd already moved a significant chunk of the inheritance into offshore accounts, just enough to make me realize she was planning to run far away, with Mark, with all my money, and leave me holding the bag. The worst part was seeing her try to gaslight me in court. She'd show up with tears, claiming she was the victim, that I'd been controlling and emotionally abusive for years. She painted herself as the wronged wife, trying to sway the judge, but I was ready. I had affidavits from friends and who saw her sneaking around, texts from her to Mark, and the bank statements that proved her theft. I laid it all out, step by step. I even brought in the Pie's report, showing her meetings with her lawyer, her plans to sell the house secretly, and her attempts to hide the money. One day, during a hearing, she got really bitchy, trying to turn the tables. She yelled, "You're just jealous. You don't understand what I was going through, and this is all about control." I couldn't believe how brazen she was. I just looked at her and said, "You lied to me for months. You cheated on me with your boss, and now you're trying to steal my house and inheritance. That's not control, that's betrayal." The judge looked at her with skepticism, and I could tell she was losing her grip. Meanwhile, I kept pressing my lawyer to push for a court order to freeze her assets and prevent her from selling the house or transferring money. I didn't trust her to play fair, especially after I found out she'd been talking to her lawyer behind my back. I also requested a full accounting of all the money she'd taken, and I demanded she return everything she'd stolen. I knew I had a strong case, especially with the evidence I had. I could see her frustration growing, her bitchy smirk replaced by a look of desperation. The turning point came when the judge granted my motion to freeze the house and her accounts. It was a huge victory, proof that I was serious, that I was fighting back. Lisa's face twisted in anger and she started yelling at the judge, claiming I was trying to ruin her life. But I knew the truth. I was just trying to protect what was mine. I didn't want her to walk away with everything, leaving me with nothing but heartbreak. As the legal process dragged on, I also started planning my next moves outside the courtroom. I reached out to a real estate agent to get an appraisal on the house, just in case I needed to sell it to cover my losses or to stop her from selling it secretly. I also began drafting a formal demand letter, asking her to return the stolen money and to cease her attempts to sell or transfer assets. I knew she was still scheming, but I was one step ahead now. Throughout all this, I felt a strange mix of vindication and heartbreak. I was proud that I was fighting for everything I'd worked for, but I also felt the sting of betrayal deep in my gut. Lisa had been so bitchy, so manipulative, and so dishonest. She'd lied to me for years, all while planning her escape. I was exhausted, but I knew I couldn't give up. I had to see this through to the end, no matter how ugly it got. Because at this point, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my house or my inheritance. I was fighting for my dignity. And I was determined not to lose that without a fight. The months that followed felt like I couldn't get off. Every day brought new surprises, new legal twists, and a deepening sense of betrayal. I watched her try to manipulate the system, claiming she was the victim, that I was trying to ruin her life. But the court saw through her bullshit. The evidence was overwhelming. And the judge wasn't buying her sob story. The more she tried to spin her lies, the more exposed she became. It was clear she'd been planning her escape for a long time, and all I'd ever wanted was to stop her from walking away with everything I'd worked for. Finally, after a long legal fight, the court ordered her to return the stolen inheritance, and the house was placed under a lien, preventing her from selling or transferring ownership until the case was fully resolved. The judge also dismissed her claim for emotional damages, ruling that her attempts to manipulate the court with false accusations were unfounded. I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness, relief that I'd fought for what was right, but also a lingering sadness for how everything had fallen apart. In the end, she was forced to settle, and I managed to recover most of the money she'd stolen, including the inheritance. The house, which she'd tried to manipulate me into signing over, remained in my name, though it was heavily encumbered. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, betrayed, but I also felt a sense of closure. I knew I'd done everything I could to stand up for myself. Looking back, I realize how much I learned from this nightmare. Trust is fragile and betrayal can come from unexpected places. I also learned that sometimes you have to fight dirty if you want to win. Lisa was a manipulative, bitchy woman who thought she could get away with everything because she was pretty and clever. But I learned that honesty, evidence, and persistence are the best weapons when someone is trying to screw you over. Now, I'm rebuilding my life. I've moved out of that house, started fresh, and learned to trust my instincts again. I still feel the sting of betrayal, but I refuse to let it define me. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this. Don't ever let someone manipulate or betray you without fighting back. Sometimes, the only way to regain your dignity is to stand up and fight for it. Because in the end, you're the only one who truly has your back.